What do you think is more likely, getting killed by a shark attack or getting struck by lightning? What about getting hit on the head by a falling coconut? What are you using in order to determine what the relative risks are of these various things? Well, for example, in the United States, dying from a shark attack happens about once a year. Your lifetime risk of dying in a shark attack is 1 in 3.7 million. The risk of dying from lightning is a bit higher. This happens about 47 times a year in the US, which means that your individual lifetime risk of dying by lightning strike is 1 in 79,000. Falling coconuts, that depends on where you live. On islands with lots of coconut trees, there are about 3 to 9 annual injuries and 1 to 3 deaths per year. But we tend to overestimate the probability of something happening if we see it. This relates to the availability heuristic I described in the lecture on cognitive biases. We tend to latch on to examples that are available to us, that we are aware of. This has a huge effect in the media. If the media presents shark attacks in dramatic documentaries, then we will tend to think that such occurrences must therefore be common. We tend to worry, in fact, about insignificant risks, those risks that are available to us or that are dramatically portrayed, or perhaps risks that relate to some deep-seated fear, which may be cultural, may be evolved, it doesn't really matter. However, we tend to ignore risks that are much more likely and much more real, but that just don't capture our attention or are not dramatically portrayed in the media. For example, the chance of dying from accidental poisoning in the US is this occurs 19.4 thousand times per year, many orders of magnitude greater than shark attacks or lightning strikes. In the previous lecture on innumeracy, I talked about some gambling fallacies, among other errors in the way we think about statistics and streakiness, the tendency to see a streakiness in random events when in fact it's just a clustering illusion. We might think, for example, that a number that hasn't come up yet on a roulette wheel is due, or if it has come up a couple of times, that it is coming up more often than chance predicts, therefore there's some streakiness involved. There are other gambling fallacies as well. One is called playing with house money. There is a documented tendency after winning in a casino, for example, that we will tend to increase our bets over time as we win. This is because we have the sense that now we're not playing with our own money, we're playing with the house's money that we just won. Our risk aversion therefore goes down and we increase the size of our bets. However, the odds have not changed. The gambling results are still what we call a drunkard's walk of randomness. You're still just as likely to lose these higher bets as you were the previous bets that you were making. This comes from the tendency to link previous events with future events, as if there is some connection even when they are completely statistically independent events. Related to the house money effect is the break-even effect. After losing, we also tend to increase our bets in order to win back our losses. We would rather break even than end a night of gambling in the red, having lost. We are more averse to losing than we are to taking a further risk, strangely enough. In both cases, however, the house money effect and the break-even effect, interestingly, we tend to increase our bets over time, chasing what has happened previously, even though the odds are completely still independent. I use the term the drunkard's walk, and that is a statistical term to explain a random event, a random binary event, winning or losing, or a drunkard lurching to the left or lurching to the right. When gambling over a course of time, you will win sometimes and lose sometimes. Again, if the house isn't cheating, this will be a random event. There is usually a small statistical advantage to the house, but even if we put that aside and ignore that, essentially winning and losing will occur in a random pattern. There will be streaks, therefore, clustering of wins and clustering of losses, and for a time you will be up, and then eventually it's statistically certain that your quote-unquote luck will turn and you will start to regress towards the statistical mean. However, when the player is winning, they are free to keep playing until they start losing. However, when they are losing, there is no point at which they are the house is forced to stop. In other words, when a player is losing, they can't keep playing indefinitely. At some point, they're going to run out of money. In fact, even if there were no statistical advantage to the house, if the odds of winning or losing against the house were always exactly 50-50, casinos would still rake in lots of money. That's because there is what statisticians call an absorption wall at one end, but not the other. When a player loses all of their available money, that's an absorption wall. They have to stop gambling. However, when they're winning, there is no point at which the casino goes broke and they have to stop gambling. They're always free to continue to gamble until inevitably they regress back to the mean and they lose their winnings. Another statistically based cognitive bias is what statisticians call base rate neglect. This was first described in classic experiments by Kahneman and Tversky in 1973. You might remember them from a previous lecture. They did a lot of work describing what we call heuristics, or modes of thought that we tend to fall into. Here's an example from this specific study that they did. The subjects of the study are given the following description. Tom W. is of high intelligence, although lacking in true creativity. He has a need for order and clarity, and for neat and tidy systems in which every detail finds its appropriate place. His writing is rather dull and mechanical, occasionally enlivened by somewhat corny puns and by flashes of imagination of the sci-fi type. He has a strong drive for competence. He seems to feel little sympathy for other people and does not enjoy interacting with others. He is self-centered. He nonetheless has a deep moral sense. Now, is it more likely that Tom's major is a business administration, computer science, engineering, humanities education, law, library science, medicine, physical life sciences, or social science, social work? This was the question put to the subjects. Most people said that it is most likely that Tom's major is engineering. This is because of the representative heuristic. Tom's personality profile is representative of what we typically think of as an engineer. However, saying that it's statistically more likely that Tom is an engineer ignores the base rate. How many students have each major? A far better approach than the naive representativeness approach that I just described would be to take what's called a Bayesian approach. The Bayesian approach starts with the prior probability, the base rate. In this example, 1% of all of the students are engineering majors. It then adjusts that probability based upon new information, like the personality profile that was provided. The probability then may get adjusted upwards. For example, if the base rate of all students is being engineers is 1%, then we say, but Tom has a personality profile that's typical of engineers. Maybe that increases the probability to 3, 4, or 5%. But that still makes it very unlikely statistically that Tom is an engineer, just because statistically the base rate of engineering students is much lower than the other majors. Another classic experiment by Tversky and Kahneman went as follows. Again, subjects were given the following description. Linda is 31 years old, single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy as a student. She was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Now, what do you think is more probable? That Linda is a bank teller, or that Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement? Well, our naive sense is that, well, Linda's personality profile is representative or typical for somebody who might be involved in such a movement. Therefore, we commit what's called the conjunction fallacy. The probability of A must be greater than the probability of A and B. When stated in that way as a mathematical equation or expression, it seems obvious. A alone has to be greater than A plus B. However, your gut instinct leads us to the wrong conclusion. We conclude that Linda must be B because she's representative of us. That sense overwhelms the mathematics of this inclusion in one or both groups. Related to this is the disjunction fallacy. Let's say that Mary is into crystals, New Age beliefs, and spiritualism. What is greater, the probability of being either a tarot card reader or an accountant, or just the probability of being a tarot card reader? The probability of A or B has to be greater than the probability of A alone or B alone. Again, when expressed as a mathematical equation, it seems obvious. However, we tend to make naively the wrong conclusion. Mary's personality description is representative of somebody who might be a tarot card reader. Therefore, our sense is that that probability is greater. Probability also comes up frequently in diagnosis. In fact, in medical school, most physicians will learn about formal statistics, about how to think about probability as it relates to disease. And that's extremely important because our naive sense of probability would lead us astray. So let's take, for example, test X for disease A. Let's say that it has a false positive rate of 1% and a false negative rate of 1%. That sounds very good. Therefore, in the affected population, 99% of people will test positive, and in the unaffected population, 99% of people will test negative. Let's now say that John tests positive for disease A. What is the probability that he actually has disease A? Our naive sense might be that it's 99% because that's the accuracy of the test. But that is not the answer. The answer depends on the base rate of disease A. Again, there is a tendency to fail to consider the base rate when thinking about probability or statistics. Let's say, for example, that 1 person in 1,000 has disease A. Then 10 people per 1,000 will test false positive with test X. A 1% false positive rate over 1,000 people means that there will be 10 false positives in 1,000 people. And there will be 0.99 people who will test true positive. 1 person with the disease in the 1,000 plus a 1% false negative rate. 1% of 1 person is 0.01. There will therefore be about 10 false positives for every true positive. Therefore, if John tests positive, there is a 1 in 11 or only about a 9.09% chance that he is true positive. But again, that's not our naive sense. There's a greater than 90% chance that John does not have a disease he tests positive for, even with a highly accurate test that only has a 1% false negative and a 1% false positive. This has huge implications for screening programs. In the general population, the false positive count may vastly exceed the true positive count, depending on the base rate of the disease. This can lead to follow-up tests, which may be more invasive and more risky than the screening test that is being recommended. It may cause more harm from unnecessary tests and treatments than it actually is beneficial from early detection. This seems counterintuitive. How could a screening program that gives us more information, that detects disease early, how could this actually hurt people? But this comes up all the time. When the base rate is low enough, the false positive rate can vastly outnumber the true positive rate, leading to unintended consequences of complications and side effects from further testing and interventions that result from those false positive tests. So when designing a screening program, you always have to consider the base rate. There are other biases in estimating probability. For example, we tend to be favorable to ourselves. This gets back to the need for self-esteem that I described in an earlier lecture. We like to think positively about ourselves and to present ourselves positively to others. We therefore tend to overestimate our own ability. This is called, simply enough, overestimation. We also overestimate our relative ability or worth compared to others. This psychologists call overplacement. This is the classic sense that, in this town, everyone is above average. Also, there is what psychologists call over-precision. So we overestimate our own ability, absolutely. We overestimate our own ability in relation to other people. And we overestimate the accuracy of our own knowledge. In one study, researchers asked subjects to give a range of answers to a question so that they were 90% likely to be correct. If their calibration, if you will, was correct, meaning that they gave a range that actually was 90% likely to contain the correct answer, then 90% of their answers should have been correct. However, on average, people score only about 50%. Interestingly, I took a short version of this test myself just to see how I would do, and I scored 20%. So I'm not sure what that says about my confidence level. The overconfidence effect relates to our need for esteem that we discussed in Lecture 2. It seems to be universal. This is a universal human trait, the tendency to be very kind to ourselves and to overestimate our own abilities. However, researchers have found very persistent cultural and also gender differences as well. For example, Chinese subjects tend to significantly overestimate their own abilities greater than subjects from Japan or the United States. The research hasn't clearly delineated exactly why this is the case. This is one of those situations where there are so many variables, it's hard to control for them all. So we don't know what the reason for that is, in other words, but that signal is persistently there. There's no question that confidence varies by culture. So it's not just something that is genetically inborn. There is a certain amount of cultural programming going on as well. Let's turn our attention now to probability puzzles. This is a good way to demonstrate our inherent lack of intuition about probability. Here's an example. How many people would you need to have in a room together in order to have a greater than 50% chance that two of them share a birthday? Think of an answer in your own head. Well, the real answer is only 23. But this is much lower than what we naively might guess. Most people guess that the number is much higher. Similarly, what are the odds, or how many people would you need to have in a room together for there to be a 97% chance that two of them share a birthday? The answer is only 50 people. Here is my favorite probability problem that some people just cannot wrap their heads around. It's very interesting. It's called the Monty Hall problem. Let's say you're playing the old game Let's Make a Deal with Monty Hall, where the name of the problem comes from. You have 3 doors in front of you. Behind one door is a new car. Behind 2 doors are goats. You are asked to select a door. Of course, you are trying to select the door that has the new car behind it because then you win it and get to take it home. Now, Monty Hall knows where the car is. That's a very important piece to this puzzle. You make your guess, and then Monty Hall, regardless of what door you guess, Monty Hall will open up one of the other doors to reveal a goat. There's always a goat behind the door that Monty Hall reveals. He then asks you if you would like to change your choice to the remaining door, or stick to your original choice. What should you do, and does it matter? The intuitive answer that many people give is that, well, it doesn't matter either way. Your chance of winning is 50-50. There are two doors left. One has a goat, one has a car. Whichever door you choose, there's a 50-50 chance of you winning. However, the truth is, if you keep your door, your chance of winning is 1/3. If you switch to the new door, your chance of winning increases to 2/3. This is honestly the correct answer to this puzzle, but how is it possible? Well, there are many ways to explain this answer. Different people respond to different explanations. It's key to remember that Monty Hall is giving you new information by opening up one door and revealing a goat, since he knows where the goats and the car are. Your chance with your initial pick, when you pick one of the three doors, it's 1/3. And it remains 1/3 if you stick with that choice. If you don't change your initial choice, your odds do not alter. However, if you wish to switch to the other door, in essence, you are switching to the other two doors, because no matter what you chose, Monty Hall will reveal a goat. You're in essence choosing both remaining doors at the same time, and therefore your odds increase to 2/3. If you run this through a quick computer simulation, for example, that's exactly how the odds shake out. Another way to envision this, and this is how I find it most useful to explain it to other people. Imagine that instead of 3 doors, there are 1,000 doors. And Monty Hall opened up every door to reveal a goat except for one remaining door. So let's say out of the 1,000 doors, you choose door 173. Monty Hall then opens up every single other door except door 520. And then he asks you, do you want to switch to door 520 or stick with your original door? Now what would you do? I think it's a little bit more intuitive at this time, since Monty Hall knew where the car was, that he was able to open up every other door that had a goat. The chance of your original choice having the car is 1 in 1,000. Your chance of the new door having the car is 999 out of 1,000. Let's take another example. You have a newspaper that is 1/200th of a centimeter thick. That's pretty thin. Suppose, hypothetically, you can fold it in half as many times as you want, without limit. If you folded it 30 times, how thick would it be? Again, 1/200th of a centimeter folded 30 times. The answer is that it would be 54 kilometers or 34 miles thick. That is a lot greater than we intuitively might think. The reason for this is that we underestimate intuitively the effect of geometric progressions. It's simply not something that we have an evolved intuitive sense of. Let's say we folded the newspaper 43 times. How thick would it be then? Just 43 times, and the folded newspaper would make its way all the way to the moon, about 250,000 miles. Multi-level marketing schemes also prey upon our innumeracy. This is, again, a failure to appreciate the power, the statistical power, of geometric progressions. In order to maintain the pyramid structure of a multi-level marketing company or scheme, you would have to recruit geometrically more people. For example, if each level of a pyramid has 10 people, then with only 10 levels, you would exceed the population of the Earth. What typically happens in a multi-level marketing program is that a salesman is encouraged to build their downstream, to increase the number of people who they recruit who then sell for them. Sometimes they're required to recruit a certain minimum number of people in order to make back their investment. It may be 5 people or 6 or whatever. Those people then, in order to make back their investment, have to recruit the same number of people, 5 people, 6 people, whatever. But these progressions are inherently unsustainable, and we underestimate how quickly you can saturate a community, a city, a region, even the world, with any multi-level marketing program. It's also very easy to lie with statistics, to use the public's naive sense of statistics in order to create an impression that is misleading. A very common one that crops up with medical issues is the difference between relative risk and absolute risk. Let's say 1 person in 10,000 gets disease A, and an environmental risk factor increases that to 2 in 10,000. The relative risk is 100% or double. And you may therefore read newspaper headlines that reveal that this environmental exposure doubles the risk of developing this disease, or 100% increase in the risk of developing this disease. It sounds dramatic. However, the absolute risk only increases to 2 out of 10,000, or 0.02%. Reading a headline that says 0.02% increase in the risk of developing this disease wouldn't have nearly as much of an impact as 100% increase of the risk of getting the disease. The relative risk can be used to exaggerate effects, therefore, the effects of both risk factors and of treatments. And if it's not made clear exactly what type of risk you're dealing with, it could be extremely misleading. Another common statistical type of fallacy is what's called the sharpshooter fallacy. It is using the name derives from an analogy to shooting a gun at the broadside of a barn and then going up and drawing a target around the hole and claiming that you got a perfect bullseye. Of course, it's easy to do that when you draw the target after you know where the bullet hits. Again, that's a good analogy because it seems obvious, almost absurd, but it's amazing how often that exact kind of behavior occurs, but just hidden in more subtle ways. This relates to choosing criteria or interpreting the significance of those criteria after the fact, after you know what the outcome is. This is also called post hoc analysis. This relates further to what I described previously as our really developed ability to mine data for patterns. We look for patterns, we're really good at making connections. For example, one fun example is the connections between the assassination of Lincoln and John F. Kennedy. There are researchers who found all sorts of apparent connections between these two. For example, the assassin who killed Lincoln shot him in a theater and then ran to a book depository, whereas JFK's assassin shot him from a book depository and then ran to a theater. After the fact, these coincidences seem amazing, like there must be some explanation there. But this is all post hoc analysis. This is looking for connections and then assigning some meaning to those connections after the fact. There is also a fallacy in exaggerated precision. An answer may be technically correct, but if it has more precision than is warranted in the inputs, then that results in what we call exaggerated precision. Here is an example from a website called Bad Physics. This website will comb through newspaper articles, journalistic reports, looking for instances of innumeracy. Here is one example. A recipe was given with ingredients such as 1 teaspoon of sugar or 1 cup of minced onion, etc. Those kind of measurements. It then says at the end that this recipe will make from 4 to 6 servings. And then it gives a per serving calorie count of 271 calories with 28.73 grams of protein, 5.38 grams of fat, 25.90 grams of carbohydrates, and 591 milligrams of sodium. Those are incredibly precise figures. 2 decimal points, two figures beyond the decimal point, 28.73 grams of protein, when it makes between 4 and 6 servings. Doesn't even give you precision in terms of the number of servings. And the inputs were things like a teaspoon, which is a remarkably imprecise measurement. In conclusion, throughout this course, we discuss human cognitive strengths and weaknesses. Statistics and probability is a general area of pretty extreme weaknesses for most people. Like many things, there's a lot of variation. Some people do have a better mathematical sense than others. But for an average person, the fact is we just have a terrible sense of numbers and statistics. However, it's easy to compensate for this with learned skills, specifically mathematics.